In this video we'll look at the difference between nominal and real values. Or usually in economics, especially in macroeconomics, when you're dealing with trend analysis or analyzing sort of flow variables or stock variables over time, we are mostly interested in real values on volume terms, in other words. But before usually going into this sort of deeper analysis, it's good to understand. It would help to understand. It would help if you understand the difference between nominal and real values. And I'll try to explain this in very simple sort of example, and we can then generalize this to GDP calculations in the lectures and in seminars, hopefully. Let's assume that you have an economy where you earn £1,000. Let's say year zero is today, so let's call this year zero to make it easier to track what we're saying about. We're talking about. Let's say this economy gives you £1,000 a year. We'll assume this is just one-off payment. Now, let's say there is one good in the economy and it costs you £1. Let's say this is burger price per unit. Now, given the price per unit and the wealth you have, what's the number of burgers you can buy? Obviously, this is 1,000 units. Yeah, £1,000 divided by a pound gives you number of burgers you could buy. Now, let's also assume that there is a bank in economy that pays you 10% increase. 10% interest, or accepts deposits at 10% interest rates, or offers a 10% interest deposit or savings deposit, let's say. And given this, if you decide to save instead of buy burgers, you will be expected to receive £1,100 in year one. Yeah, at the end of year one, this is how much your wealth will be if you deposit your cash at 10% compounded annually, let's say. Now, let's also assume that inflation rate was 5% in your economy. Let's say CPI inflation rate was 5%, consumer price index increased by 5% since last time, and this affected your burger price. And let's say that there is only one burger, the one good in the economy, and that's a burger, and its price increased by 5%, and the price became this much in the next year, so this following year. Now, how many burgers can you buy for this amount of cash? Well, we'll divide this by the number the burger per unit. Burger price per unit. So that's pound of 5 pence. It turns out this is 1,048 units. Now, your wealth increased by 10%, but you are only able to buy 48 burgers extra, or 48 extra burgers. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? I should say what the real values are, basically. The definition of real values is that they are nominal values adjusted for inflation. So real values are actually nominal values, but adjusted for inflation. So this is the case here. If we divide the wealth you have by the inflation, or CPI price level, I should say, CPI inflation, usually we say, this in the UK it's CPI. So if you divide by CPI, you should get real values. And assuming there is only one type of good, and that's burger in the economy, dividing your nominal value, this is now nominal value I call it, this is the actual money you will receive, by the CPI level or the burger level, gives you the real level. So basically your wealth increased by a factor of 1.048. So basically, to find out how much your wealth increased, by how much your wealth increased, you just take this amount, the year one amount, and divide it by 1,000, and that gives us something like this. Yeah. And to find the percentage increase, then subtract 1 from this, which then gives us 0.048, which is 4.8%. almost 5%, right? Just under 5%. So in nominal terms, your wealth increased by 100 pounds, which is 10% increase. But in real terms, your wealth increased from 1,000 to 1,048, so it's 4.8%. So your purchasing power only increased by almost 5%, not 10%. So you didn't have 10% purchasing power. In other words, you didn't have 10% increase in the number of burgers you purchased. So it's not 1,100, instead it's 1,048. So it's a 4.8 increase in your real values of your holdings. So inflation, so in this case we are adjusting the nominal by the rate of inflation to get the real rate, and this is what we mean by definition of real values. It's a it's a nominal rate but adjusted for inflation. Now let's assume, to make it further interesting and clear, let's assume you decided to keep the money or your deposit in the bank, assuming that you will receive 10% increase since from this year to this year. So this would be, given that it's given that it's a compounded interest rate annually, then this would be £1,210. So at the end of year 2, you expected to receive that much of wealth, or that much of deposit withdrawal. So you're making this much of withdrawal from your savings account. But let's also assume that something really happened and inflation rate is 10%, implying that the burgers are now 10% more expensive, and this will lead to the price of burger to be £1 and 155. So £1 and 15.5 cents. Sorry, pence in this case. Well, how many burgers can you buy now? Well, if you divide this by this, it gives you the volume, and it's basically nothing changed. Yeah, it didn't change. Your purchasing power didn't change. There's 0% increase from the, in terms of real values. The purchasing power didn't change because all your nominal values, or all your increase in the nominal increase in your nominal values is basically eroded by the increase in price levels. So that's inflation rate. So when you adjusted, this nominal value is actually didn't increase your wealth in real terms. So this is your real term wealth, and this is the nominal wealth. And nominal wealth usually goes up. It goes up by huge amounts. But when you look at the nominal terms, or real purchasing power, or purchasing power of increase in your cash, it is nothing basically, because all these increases in nominal terms are basically, when adjusted for inflation, when you remove the inflation effect here on the nominal value, it is actually no increase in your real purchase power or purchasing power of your holdings, all your savings deposits here. So since the first year 0, over 2-year period, the purchasing power only increased by 4.8%, while you have an increase, a combined effect of increase basically in your nominal values, which is your income increased by a factor of 1.21. Yeah, in other words, 21% over this period. But it basically didn't increase in real terms and in volume terms, number of burgers you could buy in that economy. So this is the sort of simple case which you can generalize to GDP calculations. So usually we have sort of assumed these are GDP values. Each year you have different values of GDP, and I can see that if you look at the trend, GDP is increasing, sort of, it's increasing constantly at a constant rate over time. Yeah, but is it really increasing, or what's the in real terms? What is this? But it looks like real values of GDP are these. If you look at this, it basically goes up and went down. Went flat. It just increased once and went flat. So basically, this nominal increase is not, in real terms wasn't as much as it can be. It looks like, in other words. But for calculation of a real GDP, we don't use the CPI. In this case, I'm assuming I'm just using CPI calculation, because CPI index is a price level, is estimated or calculated using about 600 different goods. Yeah, the CPI basket includes 600 different goods. So dividing the GDP by value of by an index which comprises of the values of 600 goods is doesn't make sense, because GDP contains, or GDP is the value of every single product produced in a country in a given year. So it doesn't make sense to divide this by CPI. But assuming this is a sort of GDP deflator, so this is actually GDP deflator, we should say, in that case, real GDP, nominal GDP divided by the this value, the GDP deflator gives us real GDP, for example. This could be sort of an example, but never use a CPI index to discount, sorry, to adjust your nominal values for inflation, especially if you're dealing with aggregate data like aggregate consumption or output per capita. They have to be adjusted by the by GDP deflator. We'll look at this the calculations of these terms at some point, concepts at some point during the course and lectures. So for now, this is hopefully this was useful.